Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Susan Demas. I'm the executive editor here at Lincoln Square, and joining me today is Jasmine Burney-Clark. She is the founder of Equal Ground, which is Florida's leading Black-led organization that prioritizes voter registration, education, and turnout. She also led the Biden and Harris campaigns in Florida last year. Thank you so much for being here, Jasmine.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. Well, I thought we would start with what's going on with redistricting. I know people have been hearing a lot about what's been going on in Texas, now in California with Gavin Newsom. But Jasmine, talk to us about what's going on in Florida. Is this really the next frontier of this redistricting fight?
Yes, actually. So, Equal Ground and other plaintiffs in the state of Florida sued the state back in 2022. We were arguing
Mhm.
that the new map violated Florida's constitutional non diminishment clause for minority representation, specifically Black representation. And so in July of 2025, the Florida Supreme Court essentially upheld Governor Ron DeSantis's map, the map that he drew, the map that he believed was the map that should be the standard for our state. And a 5-1 ruling from that Supreme Court acknowledged that it reduced Black voting power, but it also claimed that restoring the North Florida seat would conflict with federal equal protection laws. And so the decision has left us with only 2 Black opportunity districts and has weakened what we have here in the state constitution as our fair districts amendment or protections. And so, following that court ruling, the state has essentially signaled an interest in redrawing the maps before the 2030 census, with our governor saying that the data was wrong in 2020. But he was the governor and Donald Trump was the president during this time.
Right. Could you give us a little background with your state Supreme Court? Is that a conservative leading court? So this probably was not a surprise, although a disappointment, because they have been upholding a lot of what Ron DeSantis has been doing, correct?
That is correct. This Supreme Court is actually majority appointed by Ron DeSantis. And so when we think about redistricting, when we think about gerrymandering, when we think about even voter suppression laws that make it to the Supreme Court or don't say gay laws, all of
Mm,
these laws are upheld by a court that he has largely appointed.
right. And so he gets the same benefit of the doubt like Donald Trump does nationally with the US Supreme Court. It's kind of convenient that way. So now we're at a situation where Ron DeSantis is basically saying, I didn't go far enough to
Mhm.
gerrymander Florida, and I need to do that again. But in order to do that, he has to call for a new census. Is that how it works in Florida?
So, what we're understanding is the gray area around this process. And so, typically, we know that this process is conducted every 10 years with a census. The census data is then provided to our Florida legislators. Our legislators then draw those maps. What is actually happening here is that President Trump has essentially signaled to specific states, Florida being one of them, that he needs additional congressional seats to protect and hold the line in Congress against bad legislation that they have been passing. And what will happen is that our legislative leaders have already called for a special session and are formulating a special committee where they will only come back and deal with the redrawing of the congressional maps, not the state house or the state senate maps that were also a part of that redistricting process in 2022. So that is what it looks like in Florida. And it looks like we've got a timeline of sometime this fall where they will start that process.
So, yeah, we have this national fight down in Texas that started with Donald Trump saying, basically, find me 5 more Republican seats. He, like everybody else, has seen how his poll numbers are down. He's
Mhm.
facing strong wins against the Republican Party in the 2026 election. So, when you can't win fairly, basically you look for other ways to win the game.
Yeah.
But it seems like Republicans have taken a lot of offense about what Gavin Newsom has proposed in California which would be a temporary redistricting measure that he would only pursue if Texas went ahead, which they did. And he's been upfront. This would be to give Democrats an advantage to counter that. And other states like Maryland, another blue state, has been talking about doing this. You've got Ohio, which is red, Florida, which is red. So what I'm kind of curious about is the headlines have kind of indicated that this is kind of an arms race and it's politics as usual. But it seems to me like that this is part of a larger issue where Donald Trump has been trying to consolidate power. So this is beyond just one party trying to get an advantage. This seems to be part of his effort to move us in a more authoritarian direction. Do you think that that's accurate? How do you perceive this?
Yeah, I think that that's completely accurate. Florida's redistricting fights mirror a broader national pattern. Like you said, Texas is already pursuing or is in direct pursuit right now of their mid-decade redistricting to lock in their partisan advantage. And nationwide, the Supreme Court has curtailed federal oversight of gerrymandering. There are two cases that we can look at where they have weakened, obviously, the voting rights, which addresses, redistricting. But redistricting decides who holds power and whether communities have leaders who reflect their needs or politicians who ignore them. And this is what we are seeing with this national takeover of Donald Trump, ensuring that he maintains power and that Republicans have the ability to also maintain that power in Congress. So across the country, there is a coordinated assault on voting rights. There are strategies to include restrictive voting laws, to attack diversity, obviously, and inclusion. With this mid-decade census, it essentially removes accountability by letting politicians redraw their districts whenever they feel threatened or whenever they believe that their policies aren't popular among their bases. It will destabilize our elections. It's going to confuse voters, and it is also going to burden our election administrators as well.
Right. And when you have a situation where you're creating more and more of these districts that are very strongly Republican in this instance, in Florida, then they only have to really be accountable to the people who vote for them in a partisan primary, because they'll always be safe in November. So then they don't have to be responsive to the entire electorate. And that is really destabilizing. And that really does help us push towards the extreme. I know this sounds like inside baseball for a lot of people, but I mean, this is the ball game, right? If you pick your voters, then you're rigging the rules of the game to help you and to push forth an agenda that can be very unpopular, like we've seen with this budget bill. It's pulled terribly. People do not like the budget for kicking millions of people off of healthcare and these massive tax cuts for the rich and for no one else. But if you're only accountable to a small segment of voters, then it makes it easier to take these awful votes. And so what do you do in your organization to talk with people about these issues that they may think like, oh, this is just something that politicians care about? This is just not something that interests me. How do you get people to really see what's going on as, their right to vote, their right to be represented is being taken away from them?
So I think that is really the cornerstone of why we were established and founded in the first place. Our work is designed to educate people about their voting rights, to educate them about the power that they hold, and then engage them in the process. For so long, folks have been unaware of the systems and have not been able to have access to them. And so at least, at minimum, we could ensure that people, one, understand the problem, they understand how they are centered and then decentered from the problem, and that they also know that this is a deliberate effort to consolidate political power and diminish their influence. So we are ensuring that there are demands that come along with the work that we are doing. We want our elected officials to honor the constitutional requirements of a census every 10 years. We also want them to count every single person, regardless of race, income, or immigration status. We want them to protect against gerrymandering and uphold fair districts amendments, at least here in Florida. And we want them to reject any plan to redo the census or redraw those maps. And I think by having a very clear sort of path to what it looks like to be able to fight back, that is where we want to prioritize and focus our efforts. So we're asking folks to show up in Tallahassee when these legislators convene, but also show up in their offices when they're in their communities, when you have to see them at the local grocery store or the community center or the town hall, if they're brave enough to host one. We're also asking other organizations to join in this fight to help ensure we keep the constitutional compliance together. And we are organizing people to speak out and testify. Tell your personal story about how you've been impacted. For me, I live in a congressional district that has been the center of court cases for 30 of my 38 years. If that's not enough to say that we need to stay in this fight, I know that we're going to be fighting the next generation to maintain Black political power in this state. And so we have to tell the stories about who those people are and how they are connected to this fight.
And Trump has been threatening to blow up the census, and because under this guise of we counted illegal immigrants, although there's no evidence for that. But again, this is just part of the larger pattern of trying to consolidate power, because now all of a sudden you're not talking about redistricting fights in a couple states. This affects all 50 states and could radically shift what our electorate is. I mean, can you talk to us a little bit about what the impacts could be of taking such a drastic measure like that?
Certainly, it is, I think, dangerous to push a redo of a census early and manipulate population data to create maps that silence people, silence Black and Brown folks, immigrants, and working class folks. Changing the rules mid game is not about fairness, it is about control. It is about breaking the Constitution. It is about wasting taxpayer dollars and telling entire communities that their voice does not matter. That is all a dangerous act and precedent to set during this particular time, on top of also establishing laws that disproportionately impact people. And so I believe that there is going to be a backfiring of this sort of coalescing, if you will, of power, where folks are going to not only feel it in their pockets, but they're going to feel it in their representation as well. And so we've got to figure out what it looks like for these sort of, or for protections like the Fair Districts Amendments in Florida to be established in other states. So take this as a lesson from Florida to get a rule on the book that ensures that you can't prohibit or rig maps for political gain and twist lines to protect incumbents, because we have seen what it looks like in Florida. And in Texas, they don't have those sort of protections. They don't have those sort of rules on the books, but they still have a quorum that allows for them to place these types of things in place by the voters through any sort of ballot initiatives that they wish to as well.
Florida used to be a swing state, especially before 2016. Could you talk to us a little bit about what's happened since then in the state and how we're at this point where it's now a Republican powerhouse, kind of the Petri dish of all sorts of MAGA policies?
It is an unfortunate erosion of democracy that Florida has found itself at the center at, really at the precipice, and authors have derived this place as their headquarters for really breaking down our democracy in some of the most demoralizing ways. And we've seen it prior to 2016. We have seen the number of voter registration gap between Republicans and Democrats widen throughout the years. We have seen the number of people participate in our elections, increase and also widen across the years, decrease. But we've also seen a divestment of resources in the state of Florida, upwards 300% election cycle after election cycle. And I talk about that because, it is important for folks to know that these things don't happen in isolation. Voter apathy and participation is not, just simply out of choice. It is a manufactured process by which our legislature has established voter suppression laws that weaken people's ability to participate every single year. And so we have been tracking the history of participation for a number of years, as far back as 2000, when Governor Rick Scott was in the seat, and he ensured that we eliminated early voting from 14 mandatory days down to 8 mandatory days, taking away one of those Sundays used for souls to the polls. We have
Mm.
also seen where we have allowed for returning citizens or formerly incarcerated people to get their rights back in the state of Florida. And then Governor DeSantis come and institute a poll tax that eliminated their ability to participate unless
And
they paid fees and fines.
and that was a referendum that the people actually voted on, and then essentially the governor was able to gut, correct?
That is correct. People voted for that at upward 63%, I believe, of the state of Florida voted in support with bipartisan support from
Mhm.
across the state. And yes, our governor turned around and completely gutted it.
And so you have a situation in Florida where Republicans have been able to consolidate power. Um, what do you think the Democratic Party and Democratic leaders in Florida need to be doing so that they can, start to become more of a factor, and fight back more effectively against what's going on?
We just wrapped up yesterday a statewide tour across the state of Florida. We had an opportunity as Equal Ground to go to 25 counties and talk to voters about this past legislative session. And what I would say and what I said to them was that the work that we're doing is not in vain. It is not work that you should see as pointless or unnecessary. I think it is a matter of building the record and making sure that the historical record goes into place, whether that is in our newspapers, whether that is in documenting the fact that we are out here in our communities educating and telling people what's happening. Because it does not matter what they take out of our books. Thousands upon thousands of people can't be wrong about where we are in history when the story is retold time and time again. And bringing, I think, Democrats together around ensuring that we build the record, whether that be in the courts, whether that be in our legislative committee town hall meetings, whether that be their own tour across the state, we have to ensure that folks know and remember what's happening now and what is going to happen. So when that tide turns, we have the lessons that we can learn from and continue to build on so it doesn't happen again.
So it seems to me, from the outside looking in, to what's happening in Florida or in Texas, that you always have kind of this nuclear arms race between Greg Abbott in Texas and Ron DeSantis in Florida over who can implement, these MAGA, proposals at the state level faster, especially on the deportation agenda or on voting rights, and so on and so forth. So how much of what's going on in Florida has to do with your governor's, personal ambitions? Because of course he ran for president unsuccessfully last year, and he's a young man. He clearly would like to run again. So is he not just trying to appease Trump? Is this also about, his future as well?
Mm. Yep. Governor Ron DeSantis's personal ambition has always been at the forefront of his mind. It has always been a priority for him. He has always been his number one cheerleader. But then you have the equation of his wife, who he is attempting to ensure will become the next governor of Florida, in fact. And it does not seem as though her bid is going quite well, given the fact that they have both been embroiled in their own scandal around Hope, Florida, where they embezzled $10 million from charity organizations in this state that are supposed to help those, the least of these in our state, get back
Mm.
on their feet. They've used that for political manipulation around other voter referendums, like our enshrining abortion into our constitution, so the freedom to choose into our constitution. And so I agree that after a failed run at attempting to be president of the United States, he has also attempted to have a successful 2025 legislative session that some would say was a very unsuccessful run this time around. people know that he will not be president of the United States, and therefore broke away from his hands and made decisions independent of him. And I think that's how we saw the rise of this scandal, get fired so quickly, because he lost the protection that he had and is now trying to ensure his wife is in the White House. But that does not seem to be also going well for them either.
So Florida really has been kind of a proving ground for extremist policies, and it's not just at the state level. Also, at the local level, I believe Moms for Liberty, started in Florida. A lot of folks that had ties to DeSantis, and that became a real battleground for the assault on DEI in schools. And clearly, it seems like people in the MAGA movement are looking to go to every level to implement their agenda and to also, put people in leadership positions. And, what I'm curious about is what is the current what's the current political atmosphere in Florida? It's still a red state. There are still Republicans that, are in charge at every level. But at the same time, Trump's poll numbers are down. The economy is faltering. Do you think that there are any places for Democrats to break through in 2026, even, with these heavy-handed attempts of gerrymandering?
I do believe that there are opportunities to break through. We have local pockets across the state of Florida in specific counties where there are mayors, strong mayors, who are holding the line on a number of different issues that we could look to as glimmers of hope. We have legislators who are in key districts across the state of Florida who are also doing their best to hold the line at the local level. We are thinking about and looking at school districts as also a priority. And then who are the folks who are coming in after them to take on those seats as we identify ways to build a bench for the entire cabinet across the state. I think that we have to make sure that we don't concede to corruption. It is important to know that what we are witnessing is corruption, not a successful machine of leadership that everyone benefits. There are very key and specific people who only benefit from the current corruption that we are experiencing. We have to keep that at the forefront in memory of folks when we are, again, building a bench and building the record here in state as we look towards the future. But increasing voter registration, increasing participation, and doing it in a very methodical and surgical way in some cases, again, because I point back to that divestment, we have to be able to fund this work. We have to be able to organize in these communities, and we have to be able to talk to voters in a real strategic way.
And Trump has launched this assault on mail-in voting. He started on this after he says that he talked with Vladimir Putin about it, actually, at that summit in Alaska. And so he said he'll do an executive order against mail-in voting and voting machines. And I'm very curious because in Florida, I mean, you're known for being a state that relies heavily on mail-in voting. President Trump himself has used that. A lot of seniors in particular really rely on mail-in voting. And, he's never said that elections specifically in Florida are a problem because he's won the state. Mm-hmm. So now, could we be seeing some unintended consequences if he really does go forward with this? Because, this won't just impact Democratic voters or African-American voters. This will, impact a lot of people who voted for President Trump.
That's right. I think you'll recall in 2020 when President Trump put out an all call to Republicans not to use the method during the pandemic. And subsequently, he lost that election as a result. And I think that this is another round of retribution after, like you stated, having a conversation with Putin, decided that he wanted to, come back and make some changes going into the next election. And, this proposal to protect voters against fraud does actually the opposite. It is in hijacking. It is another blatant power grab designed to silence voters. And like you stated, there are going to be rural people, young people, folks with disability, working class individuals, seniors who are going to be impacted, not just Black and brown people. But I will
Mhm.
say here in Florida, Black folks utilize that system at 8.4% higher than they had previously because they were the most at risk of getting the COVID-19.
I think that Jasmine may be having some issues, and we hope that we're going to be able to get her back because, oh, here she is.
So sorry about that. Thank you for having me back. I just want to say that we saw here in Florida, Black voters utilize vote by mail at 8.4% higher than they had ever in any previous election. And so when we think about not just Black voters, we think about who else is going to be impacted. Young folks, folks with disability, seniors, working class Americans. These are all going to be individuals who need to utilize this tool, and we are going to see that adversely impact folks as we head into the election cycle.
And clearly, part of Trump's agenda is targeting Black voters. I mean, there's really no way around that. And, there are some, obvious reasons that, African American voters are still a huge voting bloc for the Democratic Party, even though he did make some inroads, especially in certain places with Black voters in the 2024 election. But I mean, there's no doubt that a lot of President Trump's policies are meant to take issues specifically with African Americans, with Latinos, and he's not afraid to use rhetoric that is very racist. And so, I think I would appreciate kind of hearing your perspective about the impact on these communities and how it is part of his larger assault on civil rights.
Yes, it definitely is a part of his larger assault on civil rights. This is a president who has made constant remarks about the Black and brown community. And again, they are dangerous. It's dangerous rhetoric to spew this type of information out there. But what we are seeing right now is something I think unlike anything we've ever seen before, at least in our time, right? I can recall reading about what it looked like to be under the leadership of a slave master, but we are now looking in the faces of their descendants. When we
Mm.
think about those Texas Democrats who fled the state because they did not want to provide quorum and have been told that they will be hunted down and brought back to the state to face the legislature, I think about what happened to my ancestors. When I think about what is happening with the undocumented community in this nation, who are essentially being picked up and being disappeared from their communities, their friends, their families, without a stitch of information about them, I think about my ancestors. And so again, it is hard not to connect what is happening right now to the fact that Black and brown people are the targets of so much of this policy. And to believe that this is going to be better for America, that to believe that this is going to make America great again. It is impossible to even imagine that this is what it looks like to be great when so many people are hurting, so many people are in harm's way, and this government, both at the state and federal level, are doing it the way that they are doing it at their hands.
Jasmine, what should we be looking at next in this fight in Florida? And you mentioned about encouraging folks to show up in Tallahassee when the legislature is back. Let us know what else people can do to mobilize against this.
Yes. So I would say to join one of the many tours that are happening across the state. People, organizations, elected leaders are having conversations. They are building the record. They are educating people about the not only the elections process, but the harms that are presently happening and the harms that are to come. Civic engagement is a year-round effort. It isn't just about voting and it isn't just about elections. It's also about affordable health care. It is about jobs and the economy. It is about ensuring that you are safe in your homes and in your communities. And we've got to band together, I think, to figure out what it looks like to be able to mutually support and aid each other in this process, because our government has shown us that that is not their priority. And so we welcome folks to join us online. We welcome folks to join us in community. Join us on social media, where we are sharing a lot of this information, and become a partner. Join us if you've got an organization that is in need of just gathering more information about what's happening and how you can show up. We need election protection workers. We need volunteers to be able to greet folks at polling places across the state. Although it's 2025, there are 52 elections happening across the state of Florida right now, where we still need people to show up, be present, and be helpful in those spaces. So there's a lot of work to do, and not a lot of time to do it in.
Well, I appreciate you joining us today, Jasmine. And where can people find you and Equal Ground on social media?
Yep, so you can find us at Equal Ground FL on all social media channels, and you can find us online at equal-ground.com. There you should be able to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, join our monthly Black Political Empowerment Call. We welcome allies and alike to join us in that space every single month. And then certainly I'd love to come back and have a conversation with you about how our redistricting process moves forward as well.
I would love that. Thank you so much for being here. And everyone, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.